I often think about the pranks Skull Kid has done throughout and before the events of Majora's Mask. In this video, I want to rank them on a tier list in regards to their severity and the harm they have done to the people of Termina. The tier list I made consists of 5 tiers, whose names should be self-explanatory. From most harmless to most harmful, those are Inconsequential, Inconvenient, Obstructive and Disrupting, Traumatizing, the End of the World. Now, let's begin listing the pranks and putting them into my tier list. Turning Link into a Deku-Scrub. We're already starting with a difficult one. I'm not sure if Link being turned into a Deku-Scrub is merely obstructive and disrupting, or outright traumatizing. A hint for trauma could be Link's scream of scared terror. At least that's how I've always interpreted the scream. Did the transformation into a Deku leave a lasting mental scar on the hero of time? A hint for mere obstruction, on the other hand, could be the fact that Link was still able to tackle the dungeons and save Termina, a monumental task for one person with mental problems. Link probably wasn't very mentally stable before Majora's Mask to begin with. I mean, he was searching for his lost friend Navi, with quite some fans thinking she was the only one understanding him, and the only one he could connect to emotionally, so this doesn't sound too mentally stable and healthy for me. Also with everything he went through in Ocarina of Time. Therefore, I'm inclined to put this prank into the traumatizing tier, since it probably reinforced or made it more likely that Link got a trauma from his adventures in Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask. Although this is certainly debatable. Blocking Milk Road. While it isn't 100% clear in the game, I always was, and still am, under the impression that Skull Kid, by using Majora's powers, moved the huge boulder to block Romani Ranch. Especially when considering the workers' quote of mischief and Mr. Barton's quote of prank when describing the situation. While the Gorman brothers also do have a motive, and the end result is highly convenient for them, I'm not entirely convinced that they could have pulled this trick off without being noticed, even with literal horsepower. Skull Kid, on the other hand, with Majora's magical abilities, was definitively capable of such an action, and could effortlessly do this. While the effects of them invading Romani Ranch can be seen as traumatizing for Romani and potentially Cremia, I think this shouldn't be counted towards the consequences of Skull Kid's prank, since the invasion happens regularly for some years now, even without Skull Kid's and Majora's interference. Overall, it's clear that this prank is obstructive and disrupting. In fact, the boulder blocking Milk Road is the mental image I have in my mind when thinking about this tier. Abducting Epona. Again, this is a bit difficult to decide where to put, but it's for sure between disrupting and traumatizing. Having his horse taken away from him definitively was very disrupting to the hero of time, and a big obstruction in his journey. But was Epona traumatized by these events? Being forcefully taken away from Link, thrown away, and ending up in Romani Ranch surely had a severe negative impact on her while being separated from her owner. However, since she doesn't seem to have suffered lasting psychological damage, she immediately gets accustomed to Link again when he finds her and seems to be calm around him for the rest of the game. I'd say that abducting Epona is obstructive and disrupting, but not traumatizing. Link also got saddened and stressed out by being separated from Epona at the beginning of the game. But considering both reunited without harm, I don't think this experience is really traumatizing for him either. Like I said, obstructive and disrupting. Annoying the bombers. This, for once, is a relatively harmless prank. It's interesting to speculate about what the interaction between Skull Kid and the bombers would have looked like. They accepted him into their ranks, so he must have passed some of their tests, and they seemed, for a short while at least, to trust him. However, Skull Kid misused their trust and did various mischievous things, so they expelled him from their group when Link arrived. Since the bombers don't seem too distraught by Skull Kid's actions, they rather seem outraged. I'll put this prank in Inconvenient. trashing the Astral Observatory. At first glance, this deed seems to fit into Obstructive and Disrupting. Skull Kid annoying Professor Shikashi, threatening to break his instruments and keeping him unable to work and continue his studies, severely disrupts the professor's workflow. However, since none of Shikashi's instruments actually seem broken, and this also seems to be a mischief for only some minutes at most, I rather think it fits into the Inconvenient tier. So that it is. Turning Kafei into a child. And, yet again, a difficult one to decide. While it can be argued that this was surely a traumatizing experience for Kafei, I have some doubts that this is entirely the case. Kafei seems cool-headed during the 3 days of Majora's Mask, able to develop calculated plans and strategies in his head. I'm definitively not an expert in psychology and trauma, so I don't know if this sort of planning is an indication of absence of trauma or not. But it seems to me that with the loving support of Anju, Kafei can heal from this experience without lasting damage. In an alternate universe, where Kafei and Anju may not have reunited, this maybe could have fit into the traumatizing tier, but since I mostly look at the official canon happy ending of the game, this is why I'll put cursing Kafei into Obstructive and Disrupting. Robbing the Happy Mask's Salesman. It can be argued that the consequences of stealing Majora's Mask led to lots of suffering and trauma for many people of Termina and some of Hyrule. However, I'm only going to look at the robbery as an isolated event. The Happy Mask's Salesman to me doesn't seem traumatized at all, and I've always somewhat assumed in my headcanon that he is a semi-magical being, you know, with the whole being mysterious and time travel stuff and all that. So the act in itself isn't necessarily traumatizing anyone, but certainly disrupting the Happy Mask Salesman and his plans for sure. Obstructive and Disrupting. Trapping the 4 giants. While these events technically are linked and interconnected, I'm going to look at this in separation from cursing the 4 regions of Termina. Here, I'm only looking at what the effects on the 4 giants as individuals are. There certainly were some effects on the giants by being trapped. However, I don't think that these effects are too severe. Since the giants are deities of Termina, I don't think they really get traumatized by these events. Therefore, trapping the 4 giants is merely obstructive and disrupting. Cursing the 4 regions. Cursing the 4 regions had a devastating effect on the world of Termina. Poisoned swamps, a harsh winter in the mountains, rapid warming of the sea, and reviving the dead are all hugely consequential and harmful developments to the various regions of Termina. This had lasting psychological effects, like enduring hunger and food scarcity, losing your voice, potentially due to a depression, and maybe even your children, or fighting off the dead. Many people suffered under these circumstances, like the Deku Kingdom, the Goron tribe, the Zoras, as well as Pamela and her father, but also the Ikanans. While most of these issues were resolved at the end of the game, some psychological effects, especially in children, might linger on negatively after the game. Because of these psychological damages, I'll put this prank into the traumatizing tier. Shattering the Great Fairies. Again, this technically might be linked to cursing the 4 regions of Termina and trapping the 4 giants, but I'm once again going to look at this issue individually. The Great Fairies, again, don't really seem traumatized to me, and, similar to the Happy Mask's Salesman, I consider them powerful magical beings, capable of dealing with a shattering experience. However, this act disrupts many people's lives. After being shattered, the Great Fairies are, well, not physical anymore. So, many people can't ask the fairies to perform deeds for them. Kafei was planning on going to the fountain in North Clocktown to be turned back into an adult, and the Gorons can definitively reach the Great Fairy at Snowhead Mountain, prior to the region being cursed, that is. So I assume they know of the Great Fairy there. Reaching their respective fairy fountain is also possible for the Deku. Perhaps the Deku princess discovered the place when she went to Woodfall. Who knows how often she went there already in her life, up to the point of Majora's Mask. Since there is no trauma for the Great Fairies involved here, I'll put this prank into Obstructive and Disrupting. Misleading Sharp. It is technically unclear if Skull Kid was involved in and responsible for tricking Sharp, but the masked one who upset things is a pretty strong indication that this might indeed be Skull Kid's doing. This is my headcanon and my video, so here I go, analyzing this prank. Skull Kid tricked Sharp into selling his soul, quote, to the devil. For me, a clear sign that Majora plays a role here, after which the undead musician trapped his brother underground and tried to kill Link. Perhaps he even revived more undead creatures. Skull Kid clearly took advantage of Sharp's desire to revive the royal family of Epona, returning the monarchy to its past glory, and made the musician do his bidding. This is obstructive and disrupting. Tricking the Gerudo and Aveil. Unlike with Epona, here I am pretty sure that the masked one is Skull Kid. He cursed the 4 regions, so I think Skull Kid had some knowledge, revealed to him by Majora, perhaps, of how the temples, which kept the giants trapped, operated. It's not like he technically lied to the Gerudo, but he certainly left out major and important parts of the story, like how a giant storm was protecting Great Bay Temple from intruders, which led to several Gerudo getting hurt. Or that the treasure in the temple are ice arrows, which I think the Gerudo would find pretty underwhelming, regarding how Aveil talks about the treasure imagined by her. This also led to harm to the Zoras, with their eggs being stolen, which eventually led to Mikau's death. While Skull Kid technically wasn't responsible for this, he indirectly certainly was, and I'm sure he wouldn't mind at all. I don't have much sympathy for the Gerudo, but I guess even they got tricked and misled by Skull Kid. I considered obstructive and disrupting, but I eventually overall settled for traumatizing. Crashing the moon into Termina. This prank technically, canonically didn't happen in the story, but it's an observable event in-game, and a what-if scenario, so I'll include it. I mean, it was clearly Skull Kid's intention under the influence of Majora, so I'd say it counts. In canon terms, as it happened, or technically didn't happen, during the story of Majora's Mask, I'd definitively put this into the traumatizing tier. I don't think I have to explain this one. The end of the world. Hitting an insulting Tael. Now I'm going to talk about some actions that I'm not sure can be classified as pranks or are slight speculation, but I wanted to list them anyway. This is the first action which cannot really be called a prank, since it's not really done out of amusement for Skull Kid, but rather solely anger in this example. Hitting an insulting Tael during the confrontation atop the clock tower has a bad effect on Tael's mental state and everybody's mood in that moment, but I hesitate to call it traumatizing, since Tael seems to forgive Skull Kid both after playing the oath to order by making excuses, and at the end of the game by staying at a regretful Skull Kid's side. I'll put this action rather into obstructive and disrupting. This tier might not be named 100% correctly, but we can maybe see it as disrupting people's mental well-being, so to speak. Abandoning Tatl. Again, not really a prank, rather than a malicious action. It's clear that Skull Kid, at the beginning of the game, doesn't really think of Tatl and Tael as important people anymore. We see no comment or acknowledgement of him abandoning Tatl, let alone joy of him seeing Tatl again, when she accompanies Link to the top of the clock tower. While this technically is speculation, I can imagine that after being separated by Tatl, Tael tries to have a conversation with Skull Kid about his sister, since we clearly see him worried in-game about being separated from her, with Skull Kid blatantly ignoring the Fairies' concerns. This is why this behavior is obstructive and disrupting. Killing the Deku-Butler's son. This is a very popular theory, and one that many fans, myself included, consider as fan canon. Turning a Deku into a lifeless tree is a horrible act. It isn't crystal clear what happened, but this either outright killed him or trapped his traumatized soul into the Deku mask. It is very possible that this action also traumatized the Deku-Butler when he found his son at the end of the game. Either way, traumatizing. Scaring Tael. This is one of the chronologically earliest pranks we in-game see Skull Kid perform. During the cutscene, it does seem to me like Skull Kid and the Fairies are playing hide and seek, but it can definitively be classified as a prank. Tael seems to be scared, and Skull Kid can be seen laughing out of amusement, perhaps because his prank of scaring the fairy worked. So overall, a slight scare for Tael, but I'm sure the fairy forgave his new friend very quickly afterwards. Therefore, it's the only prank in the inconsequential tier. Pranks before obtaining Majora's Mask. We know almost nothing about Skull Kid in Termina before he got Majora's Mask and was possessed by the demon. Thus, we also don't know what pranks he did to people before getting his hands on the purple mask. Tatl says that he was always playing tricks and that nobody wanted to play with him. So I guess that he pulled off multiple or even a lot of pranks to achieve a certain reputation of being an annoying prankster. Before getting Majora's Mask, Skull Kid didn't have any powers besides maybe getting super old, so his pranks couldn't have had a big impact and couldn't have been very far-reaching. However, according to Anju's grandmother's story, it got so bad that the people of Termina had to call for the 4 giants to help him chase Skull Kid away. Due to lack of information, I'll put these pranks into Inconvenient, although Obstructive and Disrupting certainly also is a debatable option. These are all of Skull Kid's pranks, ranked and sorted into a tier list. It was really interesting creating this list and thinking about the placement of each prank, as well as how to describe it. At the end, here's a pie chart breaking down all of Skull Kid's pranks by tier. We have 1 in Inconsequential, 3 in Inconvenient, 9 in Obstructive and Disrupting, 4 in Traumatizing, and 1 in the End of the World. So, this is my complete tier list. All pranks of Skull Kid that we know of, ranked after severity and harm being inflicted. Hope you had as much fun as I had with this one. Bye!